Imagine standing in front of a room that has secrets too dark to reveal during the day, secrets hidden behind ordinary-looking walls. This story begins with a young student, eager to start his university life, but faced with the big challenge of finding a place to stay. He had just been accepted into Kano University but waited too long to go to the city, which meant that all the good rooms were taken. It was the fall of 2015, and many new students had already arrived, making the search for accommodation stressful and difficult. Fortunately, a friend found an advertisement for a room that seemed perfect. It was on Nguyen Van Lin Street, and it looked spacious, well-kept, and, most importantly, affordable. Felt like a stroke of luck. The rent was only 500,000 VND per month, which was extremely cheap, even for a student on a tight budget. Without much hesitation, he decided to move in. The fact that the landlord lived nearby made him feel safe. However, when he first met the landlord, he felt a strange sense of discomfort. There was something unsettling about the way she looked at him, as if she was looking right through him. She had a cold and distant aura, and her eyes seemed to linger on him just a bit too long. Despite her odd demeanor, he chose to ignore it. The room itself seemed fine, and with all the demands of university life, he didn't have time to think much about it. He was busy with classes, part-time work, and friends, leaving no room for superstitions. The first night in the room was normal, and he got used to his new place easily, except for the bright morning sunlight that made him buy curtains. It was while installing these curtains that he noticed something strange. As he drilled holes for the curtain rod, everything went smoothly until he tried to drill on the right side of the window. The drill suddenly stopped, as if it had hit something solid, even though there was nothing visibly there. He pushed harder, and after a moment, the resistance gave way with a sharp crack. Dust fell, revealing a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside, he found a strange bundle wrapped in old, yellowed paper. When he opened it, he saw a talisman covered with black ink symbols. He thought it was just some kind of charm left by the previous tenant for protection. Without thinking much about it, he wrapped it back up, put it back in the wall, and sealed it up. But after that day, things started to change. The atmosphere in the room felt heavier, and there was a distinct feeling of being watched, especially at night. The air felt colder, and shadows seemed to shift in the corners of the room. The sense of unease grew stronger with each passing day. The first strange thing was small. Each morning, he found that some of his rice had spilled out of the jar. It wasn't much, but it looked like something or someone had been messing with it. He began to feel that the room was always just a bit colder than it should have been, especially near the window where he had found the talisman. Soon after, he found strands of long, dark hair in the drain, even though no woman had ever been in his room. The chill in the room became constant, like an invisible presence that hovered around him, always there, even when he tried to ignore it. Things took a chilling turn when his elderly neighbor, who ran a sticky rice stall across the street, casually mentioned that she often saw him coming home with a young woman late at night. He was shocked. He had never brought anyone home. The neighbor insisted, describing the young woman as having shoulder-length hair and always walking closely behind him, almost in his shadow. "She's quite pretty," she said with a hint of amusement. A chill ran through him. He lived alone. Who was she talking about? After that, things got worse. He began hearing noises at night. Faint whispers, soft laughter, and footsteps that weren't his own. Sometimes he would hear a soft knock at the door in the middle of the night, but when he checked, there was no one there. He would also hear the creak of the floorboards as if someone was pacing back and forth. One night, he woke up to find his door slightly open, and the air in his room was strangely cold, even though it was a hot summer night. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and it became impossible to ignore. He began having recurring dreams where a girl, whose face was hidden in darkness, led him through vast rice fields to a riverbank. When she finally turned to face him, her face was blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. All he heard was a chilling voice asking, "Why didn't you bring the offering?" He tried to brush it off as stress, but the dreams became more vivid. He would wake up drenched in sweat, sometimes feeling the lingering touch of cold fingers on his skin. The fear began to affect his studies. and he found himself distracted and exhausted. The sounds grew louder, and sometimes he could even hear breathing right next to him. It was like someone was there, just out of sight, watching him sleep. He started avoiding being in the room as much as possible, spending late hours at the library or with friends, but he knew he couldn't avoid it forever. It soon became too much to handle. The final straw came after another nightmare. This time, the faceless girl was soaking wet, dripping with muddy water, and stood in front of him, accusing him, "You took my place." He woke up covered in sweat, with the smell of dirty pond water filling his room. He could almost feel the dampness of the water soaking into his bed. The walls of the room seemed to be closing in on him, and the air was thick with an unshakable sense of dread. In a panic, he quickly packed his things, leaving behind whatever he couldn't carry. He could no longer stay in that room, not with the constant sense of dread and the haunting presence that seemed to grow stronger each night. As he packed, he could hear soft sobbing coming from behind the walls, a sound that chilled him to the bone. When he told the landlord that he was breaking the lease, she showed no surprise, almost as if she expected it. Her response was eerily calm, and she barely said a word. Later, the sticky rice vendor confirmed his worst fears. She told him about the landlord's niece, who had drowned in a pond that used to be where the house now stood. "She's still around, you know, looking for company," the vendor said almost sadly. He never went back. To this day, he avoids Nguyen Van Lin Street. Some places, no matter how cheap or convenient they may seem, are just not worth the risk. He often thinks about what might have happened if he had stayed. The dreams, the whispers, the cold presence, they all seem to be warning him, urging him to leave before it was too late. Now, whenever he looks for a place to stay, he pays attention to every detail, no matter how small. The unsettling gaze of a landlord, an odd feeling about a room, or a strange story about the building. He takes no chances. The memory of that room still haunts him. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he wakes up with the feeling that someone is standing at the foot of his bed, watching. He tells himself it's just his imagination, a leftover fear from that terrible experience, but deep down, he knows better. Some things, once encountered, leave a mark that never truly fades. The faceless girl, the cold fingers, the smell of stagnant water, they are all reminders of a mistake he barely escaped. And he knows that somewhere, in that old room on Nguyen Van Lin Street, she is still waiting, hoping for someone else to take his place. The unease that the experience left him with extended beyond his memories. He found himself becoming more paranoid, checking locks multiple times before going to bed, and keeping a light on in whatever room he slept in. He often wondered if his escape had truly been complete, or if a part of that presence had followed him. Every now and then, he would catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye, a dark shape that would disappear when he turned to look. It was enough to remind him of what he had left behind. Years passed, but the memories never softened. Once, when visiting friends back in Can though, they jokingly suggested walking past Nguyen Van Lin Street on their way to dinner. His reaction surprised them. He refused outright, his voice shaking slightly as he insisted they take a different route. The friends laughed, but he knew he couldn't bear the thought of even being near that place. The street itself felt like a wound, an entry point back into a nightmare he barely managed to escape. Sometimes he would search online, trying to find out if anyone else had similar experiences in that room or that building. He never found anything concrete, but he did come across vague mentions of people moving out abruptly, unable to deal with strange occurrences. There were whispers about the landlord too, about her strange demeanor, about how people rarely stayed long. The more he read, the more he felt certain that he was not the first, nor would he be the last, to feel the presence in that place. He often wondered about the landlord. She had acted as though his sudden departure was inevitable, her lack of surprise hinting that she knew far more than she let on. Did she see the spirit too? Did she communicate with it? Or was she simply indifferent, accepting the loss of tenant after tenant, fully aware of the room's dark secrets? He would never know for sure, but the thought gnawed at him whenever he recalled her piercing gaze and the hollow indifference in her voice. His life moved on, but there was a shadow over it, a lingering anxiety, an inability to truly feel at peace in any home. Every new place he moved to, he would spend the first few nights awake, listening for whispers, for footsteps, for any sign that something had followed him. Though nothing ever did, the fear never completely vanished. There was always that doubt, that unease, that perhaps the faceless girl was still searching for him, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what she believed was hers. He sometimes thought of going back, just to confront the fear and prove to himself that it was all in his head. But every time he considered it, a cold shiver would run down his spine, and the memory of those cold fingers on his skin would resurface. He would remember the emptiness in her face, the way her presence felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, and he would decide against it. Some fears are better left alone, some places better left unvisited. Even now, when he passes a pond or a body of water, he cannot help but feel uneasy. He remembers her, dripping with muddy water, accusing him, her faceless form standing over him in his nightmares. The sight of murky water brings it all back. The helplessness, the terror, the desperate need to escape. He knows that what happened in that room will stay with him forever. A ghost that lives not in the walls of Nguyen Van Lin Street, but in the corners of his own mind. And so, he moves forward, but always with caution. He has learned to heed the warnings that others might dismiss. A chill in the air, an odd feeling in a new place, the unsettling gaze of a stranger. These are all signals he will never again ignore. He knows that some things in this world cannot be explained, and sometimes survival depends on recognizing when it's time to walk away. Somewhere in Kendo, there is still a room waiting for its next tenant, still harboring a presence that longs for company. He just hopes that whoever moves in next will know when to leave before it's too late.